story begins with the deafening crash of a massive boulder breaking apart under the blazing sun where several prisoners were breaking stones. Among them was a man named John Rambo. Suddenly, the guards told him to stop working because someone had come to meet him. Rambo had once been a part of the Special Forces years ago. Now, he put down his axe and walked to the gate with a guard, where he saw a familiar face. It was Colonel Troutman. Rambo had served with Colonel Troutman during the Vietnam War, but later turned himself in to the police to avoid the death penalty. Ever since then, Troutman had been trying to get his skilled soldier out of jail. He told the guard he wanted to speak to Rambo in private. Then, Troutman informed him that the government needed his help once again. Apparently, many American soldiers were still held captive in Vietnam in the very same camp from which Rambo had once escaped. No one knew the treacherous jungles surrounding that camp better than Rambo. Troutman was confident that only Rambo could carry out this mission. The colonel wanted Rambo to infiltrate enemy territory and find out how many of their men were still alive. But Rambo didn't respond. He no longer trusted the American government and didn't want to return to the place where he had suffered so much. However, staying in jail would mean 5 more years of hard labor. Troutman knew what Rambo really wanted, so he promised that if Rambo returned alive from this mission, he'd be reinstated in the army on the president's orders. Hearing this, Rambo thought it over. His life no longer had any real purpose. He had no friends, no family. What was the point of being free if he had nothing to live for? Maybe saving the lives of innocent soldiers trapped among cruel enemies in the jungle could give his life some meaning. In the end, Rambo agreed to the mission. Soon, he was flown by helicopter to a US base in Thailand. At the helipad, he met a young man named Erickson who was thrilled to work with him. Inside, Rambo met Colonel Troutman and a man named Marshal Murdoch. Murdoch was impressed after reviewing Rambo's military record and medals. But he still had doubts, wondering if Rambo would follow orders after what happened with the police. An incident from the previous movie, which, as noted, has also been explained in another video with a link in the description. Murdoch claimed to have also served in the Vietnam War, giving his battalion number and saying many of his brave men had died. Reportedly, 2,500 soldiers were still missing, and their families were desperate to know if they were alive. Murdoch said Rambo's mission was to infiltrate the enemy base and bring back photographic proof of American POWs. He strictly forbade Rambo from engaging in any combat. If the US wanted to take action against Vietnam, they needed to prove that their soldiers were being illegally detained. If Rambo succeeded in gathering this evidence, Troutman's team would then be sent to rescue the prisoners. But the idea of completing the mission and leaving the soldiers behind didn't sit well with Rambo. Although he stayed silent, the fire of battle had already ignited within him. Troutman then laid out the entire plan. Rambo would parachute into enemy territory and be provided with more tools and weapons than before. The colonel advised him to use them wisely because he would be going in alone. Rambo was then shown the operations command center, filled with high-tech equipment to track his every move. In Vietnam, a woman named Co Bao would assist him during the mission. Murdoch assured him everything would go smoothly, but Rambo didn't trust him. He said there's no such thing as security in Vietnam. Murdoch grew nervous and pulled Troutman aside, but Troutman reassured him that Rambo was the toughest soldier from the Vietnam War, the only one capable of pulling this off. Rambo was a one-man army who would risk his life without hesitation if necessary. Before the mission, Rambo prepared his signature knife, loaded bullets into his rifle, strapped on more weapons, and got ready. Troutman wished him luck. Rambo had 36 hours to complete the mission and return to the extraction point. Before departing, Rambo told Troutman that Murdoch had lied. His unit had never served in Vietnam but somewhere else. Still, Rambo said, "I trust you, and I'm not following anyone else's useless orders." Moments later, Erickson flew Rambo in a plane as Murdoch and Troutman watched him leave. Murdoch remarked that it was possible Rambo wouldn't find a single American POW. In truth, their real motive was just to pacify the public, not actually rescue soldiers. But Rambo had already set out, determined to save his fellow soldiers no matter what. When the time came to jump, Rambo leapt into the dark. Unfortunately, his parachute got stuck, and he was left dangling from the plane. Murdoch panicked and ordered the mission to be aborted, but Rambo cut the rope with his knife, sending his heavy gear plummeting into the jungle. Then he deployed his parachute and descended into the darkness. Murdoch ordered a search to bring Rambo back, but Troutman insisted they wait at the extraction point. That was the smarter choice. Meanwhile, Rambo landed safely and moved ahead. His weapons were few, but his resolve was unshaken. Armed with only a few knives and a bow and arrows, he slowly made his way into enemy territory. Battling poisonous snakes and the dangers of the dense jungle, Rambo reached a temple. There, he noticed a Vietnamese hat. Approaching quietly, he grabbed the person from behind, only to realize it was Co Bao, his local contact. She took him to the riverbank and explained that the American POW camp had been empty for some time. Still, they had a plan. The two of them went to a pirate outpost where they could hide from Vietnamese soldiers. Although risky, they paid the pirates and continued their journey by boat. Rambo asked how they avoided military patrols. The pirate leader laughed and showed them a Russian rocket launcher. On the way, Ko Bao asked Rambo why he had come back to Vietnam. He said that after returning to the US, he realized his war wasn't over. He faced many problems in America, but during the war, he felt like he was flying. Ko Bao shared that she joined the intelligence team after her father's death, but was now tired of the endless death around her. She dreamed of going to America and living in peace. She touched her lucky necklace, and Rambo showed her his special knife, saying, "This is my lucky charm. As long as I have it, no one can kill me." Meanwhile, Troutman wanted to send a team to the extraction point, confident that Rambo would return. But Murdoch refused, not caring whether Rambo lived or died. Finally, after persistent pressure from Troutman, he agreed. Under cover of night, Rambo and Ko Bao reached the enemy camp. It was eerily quiet. As they crept forward, they saw a woman entertaining the guards. Rambo readied his bow and prepared to enter the camp. Ko Bao tried to stop him, saying his orders were just to take photos. But Rambo didn't care about orders. He stealthily cut through the wires and hid in the shadows of the huts. The camp looked deserted, so he advanced quickly. After crossing a small river, he reached a building and heard faint groans of pain. Peering inside, he saw American soldiers, weak and dying from hunger and thirst. In this filthy room, rats were scurrying around when Rambo encountered a soldier named Banks outside, tied to a tree. Rambo quickly untied him, and the two of them began moving ahead, hiding from the guards. Suddenly, a Vietnamese soldier appeared in front of them. Without hesitation, Rambo stabbed him in the stomach, killing him instantly. Then another guard turned on his flashlight, but Rambo shot an arrow and killed him too. Meanwhile, another soldier spotted Ko Bao and was just about to capture her when, at the last moment, Rambo took the soldier down. Now, Rambo, Ko Bao, and Banks escaped from the camp together. But Rambo decided to go back and rescue the rest of the prisoners. The next morning, when the Vietnamese soldiers found their comrades' corpses, they spread out in all directions to search for the fugitives. On the other hand, Banks was too weak to go any further, so he stayed behind in a hidden spot. He told Rambo that he had arrived at the camp at just the right time because the prisoners were constantly being moved from one place to another and were forced into hard labor. When Rambo told him that it had been 10 years since the war had ended, Banks was stunned. He hadn't even realized how much time had passed since he was captured. Anyway, the three of them, Rambo, Ko Bao, and Banks, soon reached the riverside and boarded a pirate boat. They had to reach the extraction point, which was about 2 kilometers away. Meanwhile, Troutman and Erickson had also set out to help them, but the Vietnamese army caught wind of it and dispatched their own boat to intercept them. As soon as the pirates spotted the military boat, they betrayed Rambo and his group. They took away Rambo's weapons, intending to hand them over to the authorities in exchange for a reward. But Rambo was no amateur. He killed one of the pirates using a hidden knife from his pants, stole his gun, and eliminated all the remaining pirates. Just then, the Vietnamese soldiers started firing at them. Rambo told his companions to jump into the water. The bullets were about to kill him, but he saved himself at the last second by ducking behind the deck. Then he pulled out a Russian rocket launcher from the pirate stash and blew up the enemy boat in a single shot. But even after the explosion, the burning boat kept speeding toward them. At that moment, one remaining pirate tried to strangle Rambo with a rope. Rambo cut the rope with his knife and saved himself. Just 2 seconds before the burning boat could crash into theirs, he jumped into the water. Eventually, he reached the shore where the rest of his companions were waiting. They headed toward the extraction point through the jungle. Along the way, Rambo said goodbye to Ko Bao. She tried to stop him from returning, but just then, the Vietnamese soldiers spotted them in the fields and opened heavy fire. Rambo somehow managed to save Banks and brought him to a safe spot. At the same time, Erickson and Troutman spotted them from their helicopter. Rambo also signaled toward them while moving forward with Banks. Meanwhile, in the command center, Murdoch received the shocking news that Rambo had brought an American POW out alive. Hearing this, Murdoch was stunned. He sent everyone out of the room and locked the door. Then he called Erickson and ordered him to abort the mission and return to base immediately. Troutman protested, saying they couldn't abandon Rambo like that, but Murdoch's men pointed guns at him, forcing them to turn the helicopter back, leaving Rambo behind. On the ground, Rambo and Banks were quickly surrounded by enemies. When Rambo saw the helicopter so close yet turning away, he was devastated. He had no weapons left, and within moments, the enemies captured both Rambo and Banks. Ko Bao, hiding in the jungle, witnessed everything. When Troutman returned to the base, he furiously confronted Murdoch, calling him a traitor. But Murdoch didn't care. He admitted that the entire mission had been a setup from the beginning. The government had no real interest in bringing their soldiers home. They only wanted to silence the public. In reality, they wanted Rambo to return empty-handed. But since he disobeyed orders, he was now paying the price. Troutman knew the real truth, that it was all about money. America had refused to pay reparations for the war losses, so the Vietnamese army had kept American soldiers imprisoned. Murdoch told Troutman to set aside his principles. If Vietnam got the money, it might ally with America's enemies and plot against them. And if the media exposed the horrifying conditions of American POWs, it could reignite the war. But Troutman didn't listen and walked away angrily after cursing Murdoch. Murdoch stopped him and warned him to forget about the mission. If he interfered, it would be a huge mistake. But Troutman replied, "The biggest mistake has already been made." "What do you mean?" "What mistake?" Murdoch asked. "Rambo," Troutman answered. "He is your biggest mistake." Meanwhile, we see that Rambo was being tortured in a filthy sewer. Worms crawled over his body, and his arms were chained with iron shackles. Banks, on the other hand, was locked in a cage with the other prisoners. Soon, a Soviet helicopter arrived at the camp, carrying Lieutenant Colonel Podolsky. He ordered that Rambo be pulled out of the sewer and brought in for interrogation. But even after enduring so much pain, Rambo remained silent. Then Podolsky called Sergeant Yush, who put Rambo's special knife into burning coal. Pretending to be a good officer, Podolsky told Rambo to send a warning to his officers, that if America tried spying again, the consequences would be severe. But Rambo, without fear, refused outright. Then Yush stepped in and gave Rambo violent electric shocks to make him talk. Still, not a single word came out of Rambo's mouth. Podolsky then read aloud some intercepted American intelligence messages, which said, "Dragonfly, Wolf, dead." That's when Rambo realized that Murdoch had canceled the mission and left him to die. Again, electric shocks were administered to Rambo, but he still stayed calm. Meanwhile, we see that Ko Bao, disguised as a local entertainer for the guards, had arrived at the camp. Soon, she was taken to a hut where she killed a soldier and stole his weapons. Back in the interrogation room, Podolsky brought in Banks to pressure Rambo. Yush then began cutting Rambo's face with the heated knife. He also placed the knife near Banks' eye, hoping Rambo would break and speak to save his comrade. But Banks shouted that there was no need to give in to their pressure. Yet Rambo couldn't bear to watch Banks suffer and agreed to Podolsky's conditions. They made Rambo sit in front of a radio mic and he began speaking in English. At that moment, Ko Bao heard his voice and rushed toward the hut. Meanwhile, at the U.S. base, both Murdoch and Troutman heard Rambo's voice over the speaker. When an American soldier asked about the situation there, Rambo said he would only speak to Murdoch. The moment he said this, he picked up the mic stand and launched an attack on the enemies. At the same time, Ko Bao began firing from outside. Inside, Rambo severely injured Yush using the torture machine, grabbed his knife, smashed the window, and escaped. He then fled with Ko Bao, and anyone who came in their way was gunned down by her. When they reached the barbed wire, Rambo let Ko Bao go first, and both escaped into the jungle. Trucks and helicopters were sent to find them, but Rambo was no amateur. He kept moving deeper into the jungle with Ko Bao. The next morning, Ko Bao applied medicine to Rambo's wounds, and Rambo thanked her. She hadn't abandoned him in his hardest moments, and he would always remember that. He then decided to cross the border via Thailand and return to America. Ko Bao said she wanted to go with him, and they shared a kiss. But before they could continue their journey, suddenly, some enemies ambushed them and opened fire. Ko Bao was gravely wounded. Rambo, furious, retaliated and killed the attackers, though one managed to escape. He tried desperately to save Ko Bao's life, but she died in his arms. At the American base, Troutman again demanded a rescue mission. When Murdoch refused, Troutman threatened to expose him. Hearing this, Murdoch had Troutman arrested. Meanwhile, in the jungle, Rambo put Ko Bao's pendant around his neck and buried her body beneath the trees. Now, his mission was no longer just about rescuing POWs. It had become his own personal war. The Vietnamese and Soviet troops were still searching for him, but Rambo had vanished like a ghost among the trees. He covered his entire body in mud and began silently eliminating enemy soldiers using only his knife and bow. He set traps to lure enemies and then set them on fire, destroying entire units at once. Eventually, he found the man who had killed Ko Bao. With a single arrow, Rambo blew the man to pieces. At that moment, a helicopter appeared in the sky with Yush aboard. He attacked Rambo with a bomb, but Rambo escaped by diving into the river. Soviet soldiers brought the helicopter lower to fire into the water and kill Rambo. But suddenly, Rambo emerged and stormed into the helicopter. A brutal hand-to-hand fight ensued between him and Yush in the cockpit. The helicopter began to lose control. Yush tried to strangle Rambo, but Rambo flipped him and threw him out of the helicopter. Rambo then took control of the chopper and flew it directly to the American POW camp. He dropped bombs on Vietnamese huts and weapon depots, destroying everything. When he landed, he ruthlessly killed the enemy soldiers and freed his comrades. He took all the soldiers and escaped, but the war wasn't over. Soon, Colonel Podolsky showed up in an armed helicopter and launched a massive attack. Rambo struggled to control his helicopter to prevent it from crashing in a nearby village. The damage from the attack meant his chopper couldn't fly much further, so he landed it near a pond. Podolsky approached slowly and saw Rambo unconscious inside the helicopter. Just when Podolsky was about to finish him off, Rambo rose and fired a rocket launcher at him. Podolsky's helicopter exploded into a fireball, blowing up into pieces. Rambo then turned his helicopter back toward the base and called for American reinforcements on the radio. As soon as Murdoch heard his voice in the command center, he panicked and ran away. At that moment, Troutman prepared his men to care for the wounded. Within moments, Rambo landed the helicopter and without wasting a second, picked up his M60 machine gun and marched straight ahead. He passed Erickson and Troutman, but no one tried to stop him. Rambo stormed into the operations room and opened heavy fire, destroying computers and control panels. Then he went straight to Murdoch's office. Seeing him, Murdoch was paralyzed with fear and said he was only following government orders. Rambo slammed him onto the table and pulled out his knife. But just before killing him, Rambo's hands trembled, not out of fear, but because he realized that taking Murdoch's life wouldn't change what had happened. Looking straight into Murdoch's eyes, Rambo said that American soldiers were still rotting in foreign prisons, and that it was Murdoch's duty to bring them home. He didn't want Murdoch's apology. He wanted him to do whatever it took to bring those men back. Doctors then began treating the soldiers who had returned from Vietnam. Troutman asked Rambo what he planned to do next. Maybe the government would award him a medal. But Rambo replied that he didn't deserve any medal. The true heroes were those soldiers who had suffered the enemy's torture for so many years. Then Rambo declared that he wouldn't return to America but would stay in Asia. Troutman urged him to come back, but Rambo walked away because there was nothing left for him in America. A part of him had died when his brothers were killed in Vietnam. Troutman asked him if he now hated his country. But Rambo replied that he still loved his country deeply and would die for it. The problem was that this path was one way, a road filled with nothing but pain. Saying this, Rambo walked away on his own path.